Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon, and crypto link in the info box below the video. Also below this video, you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy, and this is a particular note if you drive an electric vehicle. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now we are joined by Sleeping Warrior, 10th Man, Brian's Logic. Who else we got? The Adam Meakin, Neil, Refracted Curvature. Did I miss anybody? A whole bunch of people in Discord, and I think that's it. Welcome one and all.
Good morning.
Afternoon, guys.
Yeah, morning.
Hey, good morning. Morning.
Morning.
Not morning.
Depending on how close to the line we can get, Anthony, are you happy to carry on with the conversation that we were having in the pre-show, or do you want me to just kick in straight into housekeeping and it'll never be discussed again?
Yes, provided that numbered points are not talked about, fine, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only two people to be concerned with that are Adam and John, but hopefully they can bite their tongues in that regard without starting a live show with inside information, in jokes, or any of that thing, which is very unprofessional, but we need to clear it up. We are on a live show and we don't want anything letting out that shouldn't be let out. Let's just say it like that. Okay,
correct.
So where were we?
Storm, I understand. I shall just...
Cool. Okay, well, I'll give a quick summary. So in the pre-show, we were discussing the whys and wherefores of the education structure in terms of Newton. So the base argument is that the education structure here in the UK, at least, whether or not this is translatable to the US is under discussion, or has been in the pre-show. You have legislation that lays down exactly how you should teach children. And the current science is what should be taught, and if there are opposing views, they should be presented. What should not be presented is partisan political views, out-of-date, contextually in this instance, Newton's out-of-date science. 106-year out-of-date science is what is taught to children. Now, the discussion that we're having revolves around the idea that teachers specifically go through their education right up to A-level in the UK, being taught that gravity is a force and that Newtonian gravity is gravity. Then they get to higher education and get taught something completely contradictory. They're told that that is not the case, that gravity is not a force, and then they get taught about Einstein. They're then put into the education system to reteach something that they've been told is incorrect. That would be Newton. So as it stands, there is a piece of taught information that is out of date and stands in direct violation of the legislation here in the UK. And we are discussing who's responsible. The responsibility falls on the shoulders of the head teacher and the teacher who is actually teaching the information. So it's their responsibility, which I think is totally unreasonable, though I shouldn't really offer my opinions in this particular summary. I think I've covered everything so far. That's it for you in the live audience. Now you're up to date with what we were discussing in the pre-show, hence we're dispensing with housekeeping because it's a very good discussion. Who wants to lead off from that opener?
Well, I'll start with a slight correction. Let me start with a slight correction. The people responsible are the local authority, the governing body, and the headmaster, but not the teacher. Got that slightly wrong, but
not the teacher. I was wrong.
The teacher.
I'll have to correct. Well, although those shows haven't been published yet, on the last two shows I've been saying it is the teacher's responsibility. Am I incorrect in that then?
It's at the head ultimately, doesn't it?
The law states that the local authority, the governing body, which would be the National Curriculum Policy guys in the Cabinet Office, and the headmaster shall forbid the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. But it doesn't stop the teacher from teaching it. they've got to be stopped from teaching it. But if they're not stopped, then there's no crime against the teacher for teaching it, no matter how wrong it may be, because it's not, the teachers are not covered. It seems it's down to the state not.
Oh, hold on then. Well, morally, does that not change the position that Conspiracy Cats finds himself in, by example, when you describe this? Because in that case, he has no moral obligation, does he, in that regard?
He has no legal obligation.
No legal obligation?
He can teach them any old shite he wants, according to this. This is the current position in the law, because he's not got an obligation not to teach partisan political views. It's the headmaster that has to stop it.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Minor point. That's more a minor point to kind of, it's a bit like me as a superintendent. Yeah, ultimately, I'm kind of responsible for the things other pharmacists do under my direction. It's kind of means I have to keep an eye on things, doesn't it? Because I ultimately can be charged. Say somebody makes a dispensing error and I've not really made sure the environment is correct, i.e., and we can apply that to the teachers. So we're letting them go off and teach global warming or CRT, whatever. There's a level that sits with the headmaster so that he is culpable for that teaching if it's shown to be wrong, and I'm culpable if errors occur because of not the correct setup within the institution. And I think that's why the headmaster has to sit over it. I'm not sure they have no legal responsibility directly. I think that would sit in terms of what's being taught.
I was going to say that teachers...
Tommy, please. Tommy, Adam's in the middle of talking. Right, I'm just going to ask you once this show, if you do it again, I'm just going to have to shut you up. Right, the amount of complaints I'm getting and emails I'm getting about you interrupting people. You're on our side. He's in the middle of talking.
I was just going to refer that to Tony just back, because there has to be some culpability in terms of erroneous teaching. So I don't think we could have the statement, but I do agree that I think legally, you see, the individual teacher would be subject to disciplinary stuff within the school then. So the headmaster sits there to control them. He has to control them. So if he allows or she allows them to carry on doing erroneous teaching, then a legal responsibility under the Education Act sits with them. That says, I understand it. I don't think it means they're free to teach whatever they want.
Well, I think when you realise that the national curriculum document for which the syllabus is based on says right at the front, it says this document is you are required by law to teach this, the contents of this thing, and it goes further and says that you should not deviate from this without good reason. That kind of limits them to what they have to teach, because even if they disagree with what's in there because they believe that Einstein's right, is it a good enough reason to go against what the national curriculum tells you that you've got to teach, even though you know it's a lie? Is that a, quote, good enough reason to depart from it? Because it's not the current position in science, and if it was or it wasn't,
you can't expect teachers.
Would you
to
expect the teacher
to? They felt to enforce what they've been put as like mandatory.
Last chance, Tommy.
Last chance,
Tommy. Did what I just said to you not compute?
I'm just elaborating on what you said.
What, while he's in the middle of saying it?
No, he literally was come to the end of his conclusion. I'm sure.
Just take a breath, Tommy. Just listen. So the second part was that would you expect a teacher to put the head above the parapet and, quote, risk the risk of prosecution for teaching something that was not in the national curriculum because somebody disagreed with them that it was a good enough opinion, even though it was based on current science? So why would any teacher risk that? You wouldn't take the risk if you've got mouths to feed and mortgages to pay. You just teach them what's in the thing and just say, well, that's what's in the national, which is what they do. So is it okay to teach kids the wrong science, hiding behind the blanket of, well, that's just my job to teach the curriculum, when you know that it's wrong?
Exactly.
I think that's a harder thing to attack, because you're asking on that moral level to challenge each individual. I think the way we're using the Education Act to see the way it sits differently with regards to DIMIT, for me, is that with regards to DIMIT, we've got the two positions. that the world's gonna, sea levels are gonna rise. There's this data here, and there's the data on the other side that opposes that view, and nothing's set in stone. So the science is, as they would call it, not settled. So under the DMIC, that's why it's important to kind of clarify that there are different positions. I think when we look at Newton and Einstein, there aren't different positions, and within the education system, they continue to teach Newton without saying, first and foremost, this is wrong. So we're not having a juxtaposition of one opinion and another opinion. There is no opinion that says Newton is right. But it appears that the education system is presenting Newton as right. And some of the responses I've seen are, well, there's no challenge there. People wouldn't say I'm Newtonian or Einsteinian. No one in education would say they're Newtonian. And that's, I think, is the thing that the education system is misrepresenting, that in some way Newton has validity.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. So because of our familiarity with this subject, we're talking in shorthand, which the audience might not appreciate. So throughout the discussion, we're going to be referencing Dimmock and Gore. And I want Tommy to actually interject so he does actually have his opportunity at this point to say what he wanted to say. But then I want one or other of you, or both, I don't care who, to explain what we mean when we're talking about Gore specifically and what we're talking about when we're talking about Dimmock. Go ahead, Tommy. What did you want to add? Sorry to bite your head off, by the way.
Yeah, it'd be natural for you to blame the teachers, Nathan, because I'd assume that if they know better, then it'd be a conscious effort for them to just stand up against what they're teaching. But like he was saying, it's down to the headmaster, and I kind of feel it the same way. Like if you go to the doctors or you go to any sort of like a public service, there's always like a queue that you have to wait through or a form that you have to fill out, and things could be done much smoother and much easier. And I feel like if people use their intuition, so if teachers had more of a control of what they were teaching, I reckon you'd probably have more success in them areas, because I think different states have different laws and different ways of thinking. And I think if you have like a blanket statement for kind of like a whole country, it's good for structure, but at the same time it can be very counterproductive to increase like the best sort of teaching. Like, because some teachers will probably, if they had the freedom to be able to teach what they thought was right, they'll say, look, I've been studying what I've been given, and I've learned that it goes against it. So we're not, rather than say with the high, I could learn in Newton's laws, we'll just go straight to Einstein because this is the current science. And that's what if teachers had that freedom. And most people
sorry to cut you off, Tommy. They don't get that freedom. They've got a curriculum that they have to stick to. And the issue specifically at hand is the fact that the curriculum contradicts the original teachings of the teacher. And that's specifically. So they can't just say, oh, well, I know that, there is a Christian God, so therefore I'm not going to teach this particular part of the religious education curriculum. They'd get fired. So it's not like we're discussing whether or not they've got a choice or an option in this. It's more what's in the curriculum laid down by legislation and what are those teachings. And those teachings are in the curriculum as Newtonian, regardless of the fact that the teachers who are teaching it know damn well it's not true. So can one of you, either Adam or Sleeping Warrior, explain what Gore is?
Just very quickly state.
Go on, Brian.
Tommy's point was that he understands why people would blame the teachers, but it's not their fault because they would teach different things. Maybe some of them if they could.
Yeah,
and I don't disagree. It's just a different. It's just not. This is a hyper-specific topic, Brian. I'm not knocking Tommy, and I don't think his point's invalid. It's so specific. We're not trying to broaden it out into the moralistic question of whether or not teachers should agree with what they're teaching. That's too broad, even though that is so specific also. But that even then is still too broad. This is such a specific conversation. I'm really sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off or bite your head off, Tommy, but we're going to get through this. I promise.
No worries. I'm just elaborating on what you're saying, because I thought it'd be natural to blame the teachers as well, but yeah. I do think
I appreciate that. Just let me get back on track. So I appreciate your elaboration, but it's hyper specific. So elaboration isn't what's required. So it's not your fault you don't appreciate that. Normally it would be welcomed. It's just because the subject is so hyper specific. And I hate discussing this in a way because you have to kind of grit your teeth and accept certain things in the legislation that you cannot deal with. In other words, like whether or not teachers can decide it's a worthy point, Tommy, but I just want to get to Gore first. Whoever's going to do it, Adam or... And then we'll get to Dimmock after.
Well, let me do it.
Tony's best for this.
So, Gore and Dimmock, right? Stuart Dimmock was the guy that brought the legal challenge, and he was questioning whether or not Al Gore's video on climate change was indoctrination or not, because it was very, very right wing. It was very militant in its approach. It was very much, if you don't do this, we will die kind of thing. End of the world is nigh. Very conspiratorial, perhaps, you might argue, some might say. But the decision that the judge made was that because it was based fundamentally on science, whether you agree with that or disagree with that is irrelevant. It was based on the current science at that time. Then it was not considered to be indoctrination because it was based in science, right? So that was the precedent that the judge set. So then the question is really, well, regardless of what you think of Einstein, and obviously none of us think that Einstein's correct, but if that's the current position in science today for gravitation, then that's what should be taught. Then regardless of your opinion of it, it's black and white. It should be Einstein and it should not be Newton. Einstein should be given his presentation of opposing views as well, because quantum mechanics says that he's wrong. But what that then does is it opens up the doorway to the mind of the child that would then say, well, why are we being taught Newton if Einstein's correct? And that's the beauty of the conversation that they currently don't have. And that's really what makes it illegal, because you are not giving them that opportunity to agree or disagree with Einstein by considering other opposing views to Einstein. You just taught a one-sided, indoctrinated, brainwashing, this is why Newton is true, because we can calculate it with F equals ma, therefore it's force, and that's why things move. And it's completely wrong. Now, the reason why this is important and why it's political is on the 27th of September, Boris Johnson was on national television and he was outlining the government's, quote, ambitions for the space program that they want to engage in, because we're not part of Europe anymore. So Boris, in his wisdom, wants to put England or United Kingdom on the map with this national space strategy. Bearing in mind that LIGO cost $1.1 billion of taxpayers' money, and they've come out with claims that they've detected gravitational waves, which proves that Einstein is correct and Newton is wrong, don't you think that leading edge technology, that leading edge science should filter through the system to the kids so that they're at least aware that LIGO exists and it supports Einstein and it directly refutes Newton? But that's the science that they should be teaching to the kids, but that's not getting through. Why? Who knows? But the point is, if England are looking at making a national space strategy, how many billions of taxpayers' money pounds will be poured into this cosmic black hole research based on the principles of Einsteinian gravitation and space wormholes and all that nonsense? And you've only got to type it in Google and you can see it, that they've got an agreement with NASA now. They're going to be studying the chronosphere of the sun or whatever it is that they're studying. That's millions and millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money that they're going to try and authorize by pushing this kind of this Einsteinian stuff, because that is the current position in science. And that's why it's political, because it's trying to open the door to taxpayers' money being poured down the black hole of space exploration when it's all based on a concept. That is the bell that needs to be ringing in people's heads. They're trying to take money off us, and they're trying to use it they're trying to take money off us in the name of space. And it really works against us to even argue for Einstein, because it supports the narrative of space exploration. But we also have to give the balanced opposing view to Einstein too, which says that it's all based on Narnia. That's the bit that needs to be in there too. That's why we need to be told about this stuff.
Okay, let's throw it open. Go ahead, John, and then I'll throw it open to anybody who wants to comment from Discord. I'll see if they're all off mute while you're giving your comment. Go ahead.
I was about to say that Bell's inequality is what I was thinking of earlier. You know, that needs to be taught right alongside of the Einstein nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, fundamentally, would you go back to teaching about evil spirits passing around germs when you know that it's to do with washing your hands? You wouldn't do that. So why would we teach Newton? You wouldn't do that. But that is the position.
Go ahead, Riven.
Thing is, because both of them are you proven themselves to be contradictory, and they still teach it. It's like it's not even like this is up for contention. It's like it's self-evident that it's a contradiction. You know, it's not. It's all agreed upon within itself. It's self-contained within itself, and it's still then taught,
Correct.
even though it's known within itself to be, you know, contradictory, and they're still teaching them both to be true. It's crazy that they can do that.
Correct. That's why the Dimmock case is relevant so much, because in terms of what's been set down as precedent, what is the precedent? Well, what's the current science, was that judge's ruling. This is current science, so regardless of whether it's right or wrong, it's the current understanding through legislation that's acceptable, so therefore not indoctrination. Okay, well, if it's current science that's the standard, then it's very easy to disprove what's being taught in schools up until A level in the UK as science. It isn't. It's been debunked.
Correct.
It's been superseded. And even the thing that superseded has even been superseded. Einstein's been superseded. So both of those two current science viewpoints, I say with gritted teeth, need to be presented to the children in whatever dumbed down crappy form that they present it in the syllabus.
Well, I don't think I would call Einsteinian being superseded. It's been experimentally invalidated.
Correct.
That's a little bit different.
It is, but in
Yes.
terms of, we have to go back to gritting our teeth and accepting what they think is science to work within their system. Consensus science is what they deal with at a worldwide level. So if that's what we're working within, and we're trying to change something within the system, there are certain limitations that you just have to grit your teeth and accept. Likewise, in the pre-show, I said, look, we're having to fight for Einsteinian gravity here, and it reminds me of QE, right at the beginning of this discussion, telling us, well, you've got to get them to actually understand their current science before you can pummel their current science, referring to Einstein, because you spend all day pointing out to globe-believing idiots that what they're arguing for in terms of mass attracting mass and Newtonian gravitation, in name only, it's not Newton's, is out of date by 106 years, superseded by Einstein. Now, we've not even got to the stage where we can get our opponents to accept their current quote-unquote science so we can pummel it into the middle of next oblivion.
Well, if it was science, it wouldn't be able to be superseded. So
Correct.
that instantly ends it, doesn't it?
Yeah. If it was
So is
experimentally
science not
validated,
political?
ascertained cause and effect through hypothesis-based experimentation, that would be it. Empirically validated through experiment doesn't get changed with the times. But Einstein has, because it isn't experimentally validated. That's the bottom line.
Yep.
What definition of
the
science
only
was this
reason-
judge going off?
Consensus. So, I have to remind, I got this rude awakening when we were on Steve McRae's show. You were there, Anthony. Within the opener, in terms of what we laid down between us as a debating party, what were we going to accept as the standards? And it was laid down like I now understand it and didn't believe or know at the time and or realise it and was shocked when I found out. Consensus science is the current accepted standard. That's why, like I say, I've got to grit my teeth and say, okay, if the current science is what should be taught, we know for damn sure that it ain't Newton. They're wrong. The laws of Newton were not right. The scientists know it, so do the teachers. So in that respect, I have to grit my teeth and say, okay, what you call science, and I won't even pepper it with the preface of that. It's just accepted that we're going to work within the frames and confines of the system we're finding ourselves battling. Because you can't not. You won't progress if you just try and work your way around those things. Anthony's expressed all of this in terms of how Dimmock failed, right? Well, in failing, they set precedent. Now we've got precedent. Current science is the precedent. If current science is Einstein, okay, well, that's what you should be teaching. Definitely not Newton.
Correct.
Yeah, just that is within the Dimmock case. And what did come out, and this is the difference, is that they did say, well, okay, if you're going to do these things, if there is not settled time, if it is political, if there is opposing views, then you don't have to give it equal airtime, but you have to give a balance to present it. Now, that's in an area where there's contention. We're not even in an area of contention. We're categorically stating this is no longer science, yet it is being presented as. So there's even more of a case to balance this viewpoint. Or in my case, it's not about balancing, it's about contextualizing it correctly. It's not being presented as out-of-date science and a rule of thumb way of working stuff out, if you still want to do that. It's being presented as correct science, and that's the point of challenge to me. That
it's irrefutable.
Exactly, it's cut and dry. The conclusion at the end of the pre-show was, well, what's stopping this being immediately put into place as legislation in the UK right now? Well, nothing, just red tape. That's it. Red tape. Because it's cut and dry. There's no two ways. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes about it. You know,
Correct.
You've got a million citations from the scientists themselves declaring how bunk it is. And the teachers themselves who are teaching it are taught how bunk it is. This is not a contentious issue in regards to the actual matter at hand. Hence, it's progressing. But that's how you've got to progress through these things. You're never going to have any success with something that's tentatively correct, as Dimmock found out. You know, you've got to be absolutely certain to have any sort of chance of getting any legislative change. That won't happen unless you're absolutely on a firm ground from the start. Well, in this respect, there is no contentious nature about whether or not it's valid scientifically or not when it comes to Newton. It isn't.
Can I just say that? Sorry, Adam.
Just one last bit. The only contention arrives is when you throw in quantum mechanics. There, within the annals of education, you would have people arguing and having this debate over which model of reality works best for them within Einstein or quantum. But there's absolutely nobody anywhere that would argue for Newton, and that's the crux of it for me.
I just wanted to say that this is genius. Like, hold on a second, Brian. I just want to say that this entire concept is genius. Like, it's locking our opponents in legally to what their current nonsense is.
Yeah, I have two. Sorry, I go after you, Nate.
No, I'm just agreeing with him. I was about to introduce you to go next. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have two things to say now. One is they don't want to bring Einstein out into the public domain. They want to keep it within universities, because we bring it out into the public domain, then it can be shown that Einstein was debunked by quantum mechanics. And number two, which is a far more, in some ways, it's very similar really, but it's a far more, to me, it's a more important point, is that we can show with physical demonstration, hypothesis test, that relative density equilibrium is the cause of the effect that they claim. So we have science experiment that here's the scientific method that supports us.
But we don't need to go there. We don't need to make our own claim, do we? All we've got, we don't even have to debunk a claim. All we're showing is that what's being taught is accepted as incorrect. And it's as simple as that. That's what we're trying to get recognized.
Exactly.
What's being taught is incorrect, recognized by education themselves.
Exactly. It has to be that way to make any difference. And that's why I'm jumping on down Tommy's throat when he's tried to expand it out in terms of whether or not teachers should have the right to choose what they're teaching if they know it's incorrect. And, you know, based on my former understanding, I thought that they had a certain responsibility that they actually don't. But that's not the issue. The issue is when you have a specific piece of information, that would be Newton, and it is demonstrably, factually incorrect, superseded, were not right, you know, all those descriptions of it, then it should not be taught to children. That's it. Now, when you take those things forward, that's the only things that have ever got a chance of actually making any difference. And you've got to suck it up when you come to discussing things like Einstein. You know, we all know that there's no experimental validity. We also know that we live in a consensus science-based reality, and that what the system we're attacking understands science to be. They're not going to be interested in us pointing out along the way that, well, by the way, also the current consensus science, that isn't really science either. Oh yeah, okay, I don't care. What was your point again? That gets lost. The point is, kids are getting taught incorrect information by people who know it's incorrect.
Exactly.
Well, I wasn't trying to add in. Go on, Tommy, go after you.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, yeah, it's when the actual catalyst, the actual source that's actually teaching the information is consciously aware that it false information and still publishing it without a complaint. It just goes to show you how bizarre it is, and it's not even like that you disagree with what's being taught. It's itself doesn't agree with itself and it's being taught. So it's not even like no one can pin it on you by saying you're a flat earther or you're anti whatever, education. That's all to say.
Okay, we'll get Brian's opinion, then I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I wasn't bringing up relative density equilibrium to add it in to a challenge against the education boards. I was bringing it up so we don't forget.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad you do. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I've got to contrast it with the fact that when you're trying to fight a system, there's going to be certain routes and paths that are hard forged that you have to follow, and that's just the way it is. Trying to scale the walls and bring down the walls as you do so, it ain't going to work. You just got to focus on what you know you can get a win with in this respect. Well, what's the fact of the matter? No Newtonian gravity. It's well and truly established. It's even taught to the teachers who are teaching it. So there shouldn't be any ifs, buts or maybes about it. That's what's being attacked. But the different direction I'm going to take it in is in regard to quantum mechanics and the fact that that is at a scientific level and consensus scientific level and potentially at a I keep wanting to say national level, but like a worldwide, and I'm even going to put it in quotes for context, global scale, paradigm changing. Now, the people involved in the scientific discoveries being made in that realm, that would be quantum mechanics, understand this and express it. Very powerful, some of the statements that come out of the people who are looking into this particular science. And that is where it seems to me there is a fundamental change that maybe has to happen that would rock heliocentrism to its core. Now, that scientific discovery has been ushered in by these institutions. That's undeniable. We wouldn't know about it if it had been kept under wraps, if they'd suppressed it. But the discoveries are very much out there in the public, even though they're contradictory to the current paradigm. So the question then is raised, is what we're doing, and I know we've discussed it before, actually part of a controlled release that is necessary as a direct consequence of quantum mechanics? Anybody got any comment?
I do. It goes back to what we were discussing, culpability with conspiracy cats. Could you imagine him having to go back? Well, he wouldn't go back, but to come out one day and just be like, Newton's wrong because my syllabus says I have to say so.
Pride. That's just talking about pride. That's what it boils down to in that respect. Anybody else?
I can't ever imagine somebody like conspiracy cats ever coming out, and because it's kind of like the declaration that like when they say they come out the closet and admit that they're gay. It's kind of like coming out the closet and admitting that Newton's not a force. I can't imagine conspiracy cats ever doing that.
What I would say about it is, I've said before on the show, I'm not going to say it now again, I've said it twice before, my own belief of why they teach gravity as a force to people until they get to university physics degree levels or whatever. But the ballers would always say, oh, it's because it's easier to teach kids that than Einstein, right? And this is the general, and that's not even them making it up, that's the general consensus. That's the excuse people have given to themselves. It's easier. No, what it is you're creating a belief within, starting with children, and then moving up into adulthood for all those people who, whether they go to university or not, you're creating the belief of gravity.
Correct.
So that's why it's easy to do this bait and switch in physics level, degree level physics in education, because it's like, well, gravity still exists. It's this and not that. There's no question of whether, hang on, maybe this gravity doesn't exist. That doesn't happen because they're already indoctrinated into the belief that it does.
So you're kind of saying it's easier to tell the kids that Santa came down a chimney, even if you haven't got one, and left the presents on his way around the world, which is a sphere in this example, to drop all the other children off presents in one night than to explain the economics of manufacturing and retail. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, yes and no, because manufacturing and retail is real. So it's like people will just believe in Einstein because they've spent all their life being taught about Newton. So they don't mind switching the description. But that's fine by them because they already have a belief.
I'm going to get this parallel in. I'm going to do it. So by comparison then, if you were told because you're a little bit older, you're 6 or 7, and you're starting to figure it out, and then you want more elaboration on the story of Santa, and you're told about the elves on the production line at the North Pole. Is it still taught as the North Pole, this lie? Or is it Lapland or something now? Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that you start explaining that you've got magical elves that magic the toys into existence so they can go into the sack and then onto the back of the sleigh and then around the world and then drop down the chimneys. And that's easier as a fantasy story, even though it's not true, because then you've got a direct parallel. Well, it's not true that we've got Newtonian mechanics. It's not true that we've got a manufacturing process run by elves.
Well, yeah, I understand that. But as long as you keep believing in Santa, that's all that matters to them.
That's
they
what
can give you any description.
That's what I was fishing for. Thank you. That's what I was fishing for. Exactly. As long as you keep believing in gravity. Because gravity is a fundamental get-around for most of the problems within the heliocentric model, which they still want to retain to some extent. So even though it might be dying out by way of quantum mechanics, you still need people who are in that paradigm to have a get-around for all the problems that are arisen within the life cycle of heliocentrism as a religion. And gravity is the answer to almost everything, isn't it? So if you suddenly don't educate them that gravity is a force holding you to the spinning ball and stopping you from flying off, then you won't accept that programming of a heliocentric world earlier on, and that could cause problems and people rebelling against this religious indoctrination that is only in place in the first instance to keep people under control. So if the purpose of it is control, then you need this educational structure to remain in place until the heliocentric model religion has dissolved. And I think we're in the process of it being dissolved.
I'd also like to point out...
Every time I spoke about the globe, it's like, why isn't the atmosphere spinning off in centrifugal force? Oh, gravity. Why is it we've got containment? Oh, gravity. Why is it seeming like it's not moving even though apparently it's all because of gravity? Like, gravity's doing so many things simultaneously. It's literally even creates their solar system. Like how did the new elements get created?
What is the definition for gravity? How do they define gravity? Before going into a cause,
that's the problem.
Assigning a cause.
Well, that's a good problem. The question you're asking is perfectly relevant because currently there are 2 gravities: Einsteinian and Newtonian. 2. One is taught to children and is incorrect and not the current paradigm. The other is taught to the teachers that are teaching the children Newtonian. That's Einsteinian.
But doesn't that mean then that there's only one? If one's been replaced by the other, there's not 2. There's only one.
Yeah, but
there's not any.
Yeah. It's semantics. Yes, strictly speaking, there's only one. Strictly speaking, there isn't any. There's no gravity. But in terms of the structure that we're working in and the paradigm we're working in, there's 2. One that's 106 years out of date and still being taught to children by the teachers who've been taught the second, Einsteinian, which superseded it 106 years ago. So there's 2.
It's already frustrating to talk about this theoretical stuff already.
Oh, hold on, Tommy. Let Tommy round out his point, and then we'll go to Brian. Go ahead, Tommy.
I was just saying, it's frustrating enough that you had to talk about these theoretical paradigms in the first place, because even though Einstein supersedes it, it's still wrong anyway. But it's still just like it's still being taught as it's not even the most current. So it's hilarious that we're arguing within a theoretical paradigm anyway. It's already patronised enough to be stepping into this mathematical description of reality.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we have to, as I've said many times, have to grit our teeth and start to accept some things that we argue against vehemently here on this show. So, for instance, the acceptance of what is and is not science has to be set on one side in order for us to make this journey into this discussion, because it's within the red tape of a long-established system that you're not just going to jump over the walls of, metaphorically speaking. So, yeah, it's frustrating, but it speaks volumes, Tommy. Not only to our opponents, but anybody we approach with this information. Because as a matter of fact, we can accept the path that we have to walk along and accept that we have to carry certain burdens along that path. The burden of having to promote something we know is factually incorrect, and the only respite from that burden, if you will, is the fact that we know that there's an alternative view, i.e. quantum mechanics. But we're still having to say these two should be presented equally with gritted teeth. Well, that takes great fortitude for us as flat earthers to have to accept and do this, and should show that to an onlooker that even when we're working outside of the paradigm we agree with, to take progress seriously, we have to accept these things that we don't agree with and offer the alternative, because that's what the structure demands. And we can't work outside of those walls. That's what we have to accept. Now, our opponents just tell us, you're just wrong. You don't understand it's a force. You can think of it as a force. They double speak. Well, we're not double speaking. We're just saying this is how your current science is presented. Your current science isn't being taught. Your out-of-date, 106-year, superseded science is. That's it.
Well, you know, that's in context of this debate, that would be one of the benefits of this moving forward, is that, you know, we're Einsteinian and Newtonian are so contradictory, and our opponents jump between the two so continuously, it's hard to pin them down on anything when they make claims about it.
Well, that's because they've not been taught Einsteinian.
They don't really understand anyway. This is something they just get a grade for through school, and they feel that they've got some superior advantage over you because they have like a grade. It's like an achievement for most of these people. It's their greatest achievement, which is to get a degree in the expert that field that you're telling them that is actually false, and you know they're never going to deny that because it's taken away their ego, and that's why they feel attacked personally, because these people are sitting there looking at telemetry data and fucking satellite data and thinking that they're actually looking at satellites going around the world because they're looking at numbers changed on the screen.
I personally can't count how many ballers I've spoken to that just will not accept that Newton has been superseded or shown to be wrong. Just will not accept it. They just say no.
Yeah. That's because they've been. That's the nub of it, isn't it? That's the point. Because they've been taught it as children, right up into A level.
Exactly, that's the problem. If they were taught Einstein instead of Newton, there wouldn't even be this resistance against Newton, because they were taught it was Einstein. And Newton, yeah, he was believed to be right up to World War One-ish, there or thereabouts. But all right, we were at war with Germany, and a German national presented the new science. But we're 100 years on now. We've got LIGO that costs 1.1 billion taxpayers' dollars, yet they're still being taught Newton. Well, what is the point of LIGO then if they're not going to teach the results of it to the children, because the results are supposed to be the science?
Right. It's like saying, we'll teach them phlogiston, it's easier.
Yeah, exactly.
There is a comparison, Nathan, with chemistry. When you start GCSE chemistry, you're taught some of the history of different atomic models, particularly like the current Bunn model, which is like an atom's got like electrons stuck on the outside like a current Bunn. Instead of orbits and all this sort of thing, they're just stuck on. And you taught these things as part of the history of it, but you taught clearly that's false, and we won't be using that model anymore. Now, in Newton, that's not the case, even though the analogy is exactly the same. Newton's the current Bunn model of physics. It's been superseded, just like current atomic theory in terms of the structure of electrons has been superseded the current Bunn model. We don't deal with current Bunns anymore, but they are all the time. They're giving the kids current Bunns when we've got a superseded model, which is the accepted. And just to address something, that's the point. We don't need to bring any of our thoughts into it. And as Nathan says, it might be a bit galling defending Einstein here, but that's the strength of the argument. It's their statements of truth that we're holding up to them and making them kind of have to stand by. That's what we're asking them to do.
This is the same.
Where I've got to go back.
I would just say it's the same steps in debate. I've said this, I'll give Quantum Eraser the credit he deserves, because these are the same steps you have to take in debate. Before you can pummel Einstein, you've got to have an acceptance of Einstein. And as it's just been pointed out by Rems, They don't have the current acceptance of Einstein because they're being taught 106 years, kids and adults alike, 106 year out-of-date Newtonian nonsense. Well, therefore, how... maybe that's the reason. How the hell are we supposed to defend the current pseudo four-space time-bending nonsense in terms of its completely being obliterated scientifically with the onset of quantum mechanics, when people don't even accept the current scientific nonsense they're being presented by the consensus? What chance have we got? Maybe that's the point.
Well, the main sort of point I brought up yesterday with Anthony and John and the lads after the show, I would consider one of the main problems here is that people actually believe that there's a definition for gravity. Like, they actually believe there's more than one definition, because you ask someone to define gravity and they can give you three different people can give you three different definitions, if they're ballers especially. Officially there's two, right? And
no,
officially
there's one.
I'm not finished. Before you jump on me, please. I knew you were going to jump in. I'm sorry now, I have to stop you. Right? Officially, right, there's two, and only one of them is supposed to be correct. No, none of them are a definition. They're descriptions. They're not defined. You can't claim a definition of something that you can't show. If you don't have it to show, you can't define it, because anyone can give a different definition.
Phenomenon?
And but hang on 1 second. My point being is that, let's say, Rams, you give a definition of something, and I can give a different definition of it, and you can't prove my definition wrong if you can't show it. So what are they? They're just descriptions.
That's his point. Alden, that's his point, Ram. So you asked what the phenomena is. That's what Brian's saying. If you can't show it, you can describe it. If we can't show the phenomena of unicorn excretion, yeah. Well, if you can't show it, but you describe it mathematically, and I describe it differently to Brian's description of unicorn digestion, it matters not if neither of you can show it. So whose description's right? Well, there isn't a phenomena, as you correctly ask. What's the phenomena? Well, there isn't one.
Right. So let me push that one step further and say, right, I've got a scientific body here that wants to study the unicorn excretion system, and we want $100 million to do it. Can we have that money, please? Yeah, sure. There's taxpayers' money to go and research it. Does that not piss anybody off?
Yeah, I understand your point.
Quite like unicorns.
My daughter would be so happy.
That science just gets like an unlimited pot of money, and it's all taxpayers' money.
They get triggered just because a couple of people like the idea of a bit of a science, club for unicorns. Me and John are contemplating this idea. Just leave us to it for a sec. What do you reckon?
Check, Tony, before I spend that money. The scientists studying the unicorn, will they be traveling there by wardrobe or car?
It'll be done mathematically, and you can think that it's been done through a car or a wardrobe if you want, but actually it's just going to be done in maths.
Why are you speaking? You wanted to do away with this. Would there be funding for a wardrobe-based transport system?
I think so.
I mean,
listen, guys,
hold on. I'm just trying to establish what the funding situation is, Anthony. So if it was funding for a wardrobe-based system, obviously that would be, let's call it experimental, and therefore there would actually be a necessity for a car fund too. So I'm going to say wardrobe-based travelling system, if that's good by you, because then that will classed as the thing we're inquiring about, and we can get funding for that, and then we'll obviously put the travelling expenses as cars separate. Cool.
May I add something?
As long as you're not trying to get funding for my wardrobe research.
No. Just hang in there, Nathan. I'll get to it. Sleeping Warrior and I talked a while back ago, and he said it before. And just confirm this, yes or no. In Einstein's version, the Earth is going up. Is that right?
Well, that's his equivalence principle, isn't it? He says that the apple doesn't actually accelerate down because gravity is not a force. Earth is traveling along its geodesic path, and it is traveling in the upwards direction at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared, and the apple fails to conserve its momentum and appears to fall to the ground, but it doesn't actually. It's the Earth that rises up to the apple because the apple fails to conserve its momentum.
Okay, I think this is a main point they're trying to hide, because if you're on the ball, what's happening antipodal to you if it's going up?
Exactly.
And so this is more embarrassing for them than anything.
Hold on. I love how you get into how the begging the question mathematics is nonsensical. Sorry, your description that Einstein gave, Anthony, had an Earth as a sphere with a journey. You said about it travelling, correct?
Yeah.
And the path of that journey was along a geodesic, correct?
Yeah.
And that would be the bent concept within pseudo-Riemannian four space-time. Fourth dimensional space-time bending would be the path, correct?
Yeah, but we can demonstrate it with a bedsheet.
Sorry, just let me get clarity. The Earth, according to this description, travelling up towards the apple, is taking a path along a conceptual fourth dimensional bent geodesic, correct?
Yeah.
Can you travel in a concept, Anthony?
No, but we can calculate it.
Can you physically travel through a concept?
No, but you can think that you can.
Why you need the wardrobes?
Yeah, the bed is a cover story.
Wardrobe research will supersede the research about a travel that would be a path through a geodesic in bending space-time.
Well, here's the thing, Nathan. If you give me $1.1 billion, I'll be able to tell you how we can do it.
How you can show a reified mathematical fourth dimension in a three-dimensional actuality. You think that you can throw money at physicalization of a fourth dimension? You think that's possible with LIGO?
We just need some funding to prove it. We'll send a probe up there and we'll come back with some telemetry data and we won't lose it, we promise.
You know what I need? I need at least 10 times that to discover the fifth dimension. And I can show that the fifth dimension has also got a curve in it, right? I mean, I'll just invent a new dimension and study that and find the curve in that dimension I've invented. So LIGO is essentially investigating the bending of a dimension that doesn't exist. A conceptual dimension that only exists in maths. And they're looking for a bend in that, are they? Give it another 10 billion.
I've got to give a shout out to George Musa. His PhD thesis was written on the convection currents of Venus, right? Think about that. Convection currents of Venus, a light in the sky for all we can tell, right? No one knows what it is. It just appears to be a light, but they can tell you about the convection currents beneath its surface. Really? How did somebody get a thesis out of that and a PhD?
Hang on, can I get back to my point here? Just
before we do, his thesis was based on a second law of thermodynamics violation. How much attention was the second law of thermodynamics given in Mr. Musa's thesis?
He's a theoretical physicist, so he's allowed to violate laws of thermodynamics in the theoretical world, but you can think it's real world.
Yeah, but that's why he was able to say that there's convection currents, because he's able to then, at any point he needs to, claim a force of gravity is keeping these gases or whatever on Venus.
But he only did his calculations up to the Venusian Kármán line.
Well, isn't that the reason that?
No, he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
The reason that George?
I just want to say what Adam said didn't slip through very well. He's saying he's calculating it up to the Venetian Kármán line, which would be the arbitrary position where the gas doesn't fill the space, in spite of natural law dictating that the gas on Venus, in a presupposed orbit, in a presupposed second law of thermodynamics violation sky vacuum, when it's in fact just a light in our sky, all those things notwithstanding, he would have to have a Kármán line and gravity to make his assertion that stands in violation of the second law. Yes, Adam, correct.
Well,
go ahead.
He also needs R, funnily enough.
Yeah, he'd also need our twin. Yeah, it's definitely going to need R when they've asserted that Venus is the same size as Earth based on Earth's R value being assumed and superimposed onto Venus as a light in the sky, as a sphere in a presupposed orbit in a sky vacuum. John, go ahead.
Adam stole half my point.
20 and 10.
But hold on a sec. I just wanted to say that with Newtonian mechanics, they invented an imaginary force to hold everybody on the ball. Einsteinian mechanics is about inventing a new reality to hold everybody on the ball.
Correct. A completely new dimension. Pseudo-Riemannian for space-time bending, and then the search for that bent whatever they're going to call it, gravitational field or whatever they're claiming that to look for in LIGO. They're looking for something that exists in a conceptual medium that's been invented by Einstein on paper in maths. So because Einstein's invented a dimension in maths, they're now going to look for it with billions of dollars of equipment. It's absolutely pathetic.
And all the geniuses back then, nobody could pull his card on this. Ridiculous.
No, because wardrobe funding is very, very tempting.
Well,
I'm
just
sorry,
on
where was all the
Ted's
educated
point,
people?
The consensus of my daughters, the consensus of my daughters is that you should definitely move forward with this unicorn investigation.
Just on Ted's point, right? Their explanation for this that I've seen is that the Earth is always expanding out the way. So technically our globe is always expanding out the way in all directions. But this expansion out the way is counteracted by the curvature of space-time that is always curving in the way. So it's like that's why he's able to make that claim. So mathematically, the curvature of space-time is always curving in the way while the globe Earth is expanding out the way. That is what they say. That was the basics I've seen from PhDs.
But can I give the counter to that?
Well, you can, as I add in fourth dimensional pseudo-Riemannian force space, right, Brian? That's when this is actually, or where this is actually occurring.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
The point I was getting to.
It was just let Sleeping Warrior respond.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sleeping Warrior.
But I haven't finished. What I was saying.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. The point I was trying to get to, I gave that description, is because that is just another description of the same thing that they can't define and show. It's just more descriptions, the same way as if we describe how deep underneath the skin the unicorn horn goes. You know, we can describe it as 1 inch, 2 inches, 2.5 inches. We can describe it all day, but we can't show it. So we can't define it.
So when you were saying about the explanation for how it is on the other side of the ball that the space-time is compensating, that same compensation happens on this side too. So whilst they have the ball on the bed sheet and it's showing the dimple, the weight of the ball bending the fabric of the space-time that it's sitting on, the exact opposite is also happening above it. So there is no directionality to this, yet they show it with a distortion that is only created in one direction. But that's happening equally in all infinite vectors all the way around that sphere. And it's always doing, in other words, there is an F net equals 0 position where there isn't any actual, everything's equal and opposite all the way around it. So they explain it with a one-dimensional perspective, but don't tell you that that's happening in all directions equally at all times. In other words, it doesn't explain the problem that they're trying to explain, only if they do it in the one dimension.
But no, hold on. I'm sorry, Tenth. You've been trying to get in for a while. I'm sorry.
Go on, Tenth.
No, go ahead. I'll finish after you.
I was just going to say that they do give it a direction. They're saying that the orbit of Earth is giving it an inertial vector, and
The
whether
what?
that, yeah, you'll hear them say that it's an inertial force. You ever heard that?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, they're saying that the motion around the sun, which we're not moving around the sun, we're not on a ball. It's all silly.
Yes, it's an expansion of the claim after the cause and effect relationship's laid down. So cause, uneven distribution of mass; effect, bending of space-time; effect, after the effect, the force that it isn't. So they have a force from a non-force. Go ahead, Tenth.
Okay, so my opinion on this is they haven't been programmed until they get out of all the grade schools until university. So they need the programming time with Newton. If they were to introduce Einstein at the grade levels, pun intended, it will show how far the lie goes.
Right. With that, I'm going to say, if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Premiering streams, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you are watching this live, this is where we bid you farewell. So a huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of you who liked, commented, shared, subscribed, hit the PayPal link, and all that good stuff. Also, below this video, you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy, and this is of particular note if you drive an electric vehicle. I've been Nathan Oakley. Stay tuned if you're watching on a premiering stream, and I will see you all in the next video.
What a day! What a lovely day!